Welcome to this week's Who the Folk podcast. I'm Lonnie Goldsmith, the editor of TC Jewfolk. This week we are joined by David Milavetz, the new president of the board here at Jewfolk. David and I talk about career changes, the law, and how he's seen this organization evolve in the nearly 6 years he's been involved at Jewfolk on this week's Who the Folk podcast. David Milavetz, welcome to the Who the Folk podcast, and Happy New Year. Welcome to 2020.
Happy New Year to you, too.
So you have sort of been a Who the Folk before, back in the early days of
that's true
of Who the Folk, with Bradley Maychov as when he was the editor. You know that was a little more than 5 years ago. In that time, among other things, you are the new president of the board of TC Jewfolk. You're helping lead us into our second decade.
Very excited for that.
So you've been with Jewfolk for the half of its life, basically, as a board member. How have you seen the organization evolve, and what are you looking forward to help implement, especially in this year?
Sure. Well, when I first joined, we didn't have an executive director. And we...
Boy, that was a long time ago.
It was an incredibly long time ago. It's incredible to see how much we've grown as an organization, not just financially, not just on staff, but what we do.
Yeah.
We've gone from mostly a blog to having an incredibly diverse array of offerings, from articles, from podcasts like this, to J-Link, networking events, to Mamalas, to a lot of other programs that we've been working on. So it's really exciting to see what we've become.
It's been it's amazing how much you talk about all those things. It's sort of amazing how much of that's sort of packed into the last 5 years.
Yeah, it is.
It feels like a lot to accomplish for a small organization.
And we're very lucky to have people like you and Libby.
Thank you.
Help make that a reality.
And we're very lucky and happy to have you on the board and being as involved as you have been. When we last talked to you, you had just finished your master's up in public policy, and now we talk to you. You've just graduated law school, passed the bar,
it's
become
crazy.
A lawyer.
Yeah.
I guess we'll talk to you again with your next job change.
Maybe after my PhD.
we'll have you back on. So tell us a little bit about sort of the few years between finishing your master's and then starting law school. What were you doing in public policy at that point?
That's a long road, long road to travel.
Okay.
But I was doing a lot of different things, from working in research and evaluation at the Science Museum in St. Paul. And I think I was doing that had just been starting that when we talked.
Okay.
Which is an indicator of how long it's been. And then I was also doing some of my own consulting projects.
Okay.
I did the planning project with the St. Paul Federation. And I also did a bunch of other program evaluation work with theater groups and arts organizations.
Okay.
So I don't know how I ended up in law, but I did. It just felt like a natural fit for me, and here I am. And
one of the things I know you had helped in terms of the evaluation style, you had helped Jewfolk when we were starting the early days of sort of community surveys in terms of what people were reading, what they wanted to see. That was very much something that you had helped us design.
Yes,
as well.
I've always been interested in kind of how people perceive the world, how people perceive their communities around them, which is how I got into that work. Originally, I was doing a lot of advocacy work, a lot of lobbying, and we use a lot of numbers. You use a lot of numbers in that world, but you don't. I didn't really know how.
Okay.
So that's just building surveys and figuring out how people feel about things was always very interesting to me. I like to know how things work.
So you had mentioned the work you've done with the St. Paul Federation on the consulting side. You're from Mendota Heights.
I am.
Is that sort of was that work sort of your introduction to Jewish communal work? That's what you had done with Federation?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was on the board of Jewfolk before that, actually. That shows you how long I've been on the Jewfolk board. But that was probably my first exposure to the Jewish community at large, and kind of knowing how the different organizations interact with each other, the different pieces in the community. And it was really just a great experience to get to work with some really talented, skilled people and volunteers in the community.
What is it that drew you to working with and volunteering in the Jewish community?
Yeah, and that's a good question, because for a while I'd really struggled with my Jewish identity and how I engaged with the community.
Mm-hmm.
My family's always really valued giving back and being part of the community, which is partly where I drew that interest from. And I don't know if this is the best way to explain it, but part of what drew me to Jewfolk was our original tagline of 10,000 ways to be Jewish. And so I basically am just searching for a way to kind of identify and connect with the community. And so I thought, what's better than using skills that I have and interests that I have to try to help make a positive impact in our community. And I don't know if that ended up happening, but I really enjoyed a lot of the work, and I found it to be very meaningful for me.
Well, 5 years later, you're still involved with Jewfolk, so almost 6 years
true.
at this point.
Yeah,
so it's obviously had some sort of impact.
Yep, it's kept me involved, and I've met a lot of great people, and it's been a great experience.
So you mentioned, sort of your family ethos, in terms of giving back. Have your parents been sort of long involved in the Twin Cities community?
Yeah, and I always looked up to them for that. My dad was a president of Federation back in the early 2000s, and my mom is currently sitting on the Talmud Torah board and Federation board.
Wow!
And so I had great role models and examples to look to for what it means to be involved in the community.
It's sort of the family business you've come into.
Except we don't get paid.
Well, as volunteers,
yes, of course,
volunteer. But also the family business. You joined your father's law firm.
I did, yes.
So, what was it that brought you to law? Was it familial pressure, or was it always
no pressure? I just wanted to try something different.
Okay.
I loved the research evaluation work I was doing, but I just kind of hit a point where I thought, maybe it's time for a different adventure, a different challenge, and I kind of saw law school as a challenge, and it rightfully is. 3 years of constant reading and preparing for the bar is not something I would recommend anyone take lightly. I probably took it too lightly. But
you passed everything.
I got through, I made it through somehow, and I passed the bar, and it's still the beginning for me. So there's still a lot I have to learn and a lot I have to do.
So what's the adjustment process to going from, sort of student to professional to student again, and then professional again in a new profession? How do you, I know that's something that a lot of people do. It's not all that uncommon, but how do you, I guess, how do you sort of making those kinds of transitions every few years? How hard is that?
It was a struggle. Actually, when I went into law school, I was still doing Federation work, and I was still doing some other consulting work as well. So I had like 3 or 4 clients that I was working with well in law school.
Oh, wow.
So the first year or so was a real challenge, but it's really just taught me how important it is to keep on top of things, to be aware of what you're agreeing to do and signing up for. And I think it's made me a stronger leader and just a stronger person to be able to deal with so many things and still, at the end of the day, know that I made it through. Know that I finished law school. And whether I'll be successful in law or not, who knows? But I'm at least giving myself a shot.
So what's the area of law that you're most interested in as you're getting started out?
I've always been really interested in healthcare law,
okay.
Whether that's medical malpractice or healthcare compliance. I'm not 100% sure yet, but I do get to work on some of that while I'm at the firm, as well as personal injury, which deals with a lot of health insurance laws and healthcare issues.
Sure. It's complicated law, I'd imagine.
It can be. Yeah, it can be. Some of it's not as complicated as other parts of it, but there's a lot of complicated medical terminology that I'm still working on becoming.
So you went to law school, not med school.
I did. So now I have to kind of reorient my brain. But I did study healthcare law a little bit, so I've got a little head start.
Well, that's good. So you found your path that you're wanting to travel with regards to the law, but do you think there's still a place for using your public policy background in conjunction with your law, especially care? There's a lot of public policy component in healthcare and healthcare law. Do you see some places where there's some crossover? I
absolutely, especially with my volunteer work.
Okay.
I think I'll always be interested in volunteering, either, obviously with Jewfolk, but also with nonprofits outside of the Jewish community at some point.
Okay.
I haven't really extended that way yet, but I also think there's a lot of public policy components about the law, making sure that justice is achieved for someone that got injured or for someone that was wronged by society, and there's a lot of pro bono opportunities that you can become involved in. So I see policy operating for me in my volunteering and my professional life, just in a different way.
Sure. Is it you feel like you're just sort of getting thrown into the deep end a bit?
Right now, yeah. Right now, I'm just kind of getting thrown into things and learning the field, learning what you have to do. But at some point, my hope is I can come out with my head above the water and have a little time to strategize my life.
Feel settled a little bit.
Yeah, maybe in a couple of years.
Well, hopefully before then.
Yeah.
I suppose professionally you'll feel. I would have to imagine at least the quicker you feel settled in, the easier it'll be to sort of as you can continue the transition into being a lawyer.
Yes,
I suppose it would be easier.
Be easier to do everything outside of
that
the
too.
Yeah.
That too.
Yeah.
Well, excellent. So, last couple of questions here.
Sure.
You said, and I have up in front of me.
Oh,
no, I have the previous ones just so we. Just to see if anything's changed.
Yeah.
Favorite Jewish food?
Unfortunately, that has not changed. It's only enhanced. I believe I said blintzes, but not the frozen kind last time.
Verbatim.
Yes. Let's see, that made a very distinct impression.
Clearly.
I now know how to cook homemade blintzes.
Do you?
So I have enhanced my skill set.
Oh.
In that way.
Okay, so all right, so I got to ask you, because I've never taken on homemade blintzes.
Sure.
To me, the hardest part has to be making the crepe, right?
I actually found that to be pretty easy.
Really?
Obviously there's a million different recipes.
Yeah.
And you can adjust it for how sweet you want it to be, or whatever you want it to taste like.
Right.
But the hardest part for me was making sure that the blintz didn't break once you wrapped it. And I still struggle with that. So It's not perfected yet.
Okay.
But maybe one day you're going to see a Milavetz food truck that sells blintzes and corned beef sandwiches.
I'm there. As soon as
That's
that
another
happens.
recipe I'm working on.
Corned beef?
Yeah, corned beef and pastrami.
Oh, love corned beef and pastrami. All right. And favorite Jewish holiday?
Oh, God. That's...
And while you're thinking about this, and looking back to see this question, your first appearance in Who the Folk, when it was a strictly written piece, predates the question, what's your favorite Jewish holiday?
Really?
So
yes. There's no comparison.
There is no comparison, so you could say whatever you want.
Back then I would have said Hanukkah.
Okay.
Now I would probably say Shabbat.
Okay.
And which I know happens all the time, but it's just I love having that night to just kind of relax, either with family or friends. I don't always celebrate it, but when I do, it's enjoyable. Are
you shut the phones off, shut everything down?
No,
okay.
No. Yeah, I just enjoy it for what it means. We all live really busy, stressful lives, and making it in today's world requires a lot of intense thought and time, and it's just a day where you can kind of take a break and not focus on the world. So I love that.
And you mentioned one of the early taglines of Jewfolk. There's 10,000 ways to be Jewish, and I don't shut down everything on Shabbat either. People who listen to this do. People don't, but we don't care here.
Nope.
You do you. Doesn't
Exactly.
doesn't matter to us.
Exactly. Whatever ways that you can engage Jewishly, that's great.
Absolutely. Well, David Milavetz, new president of the board, thank you for joining us on this week's podcast, and we look forward to your leadership of Jewfolk over the coming couple of years.
Thanks so much for having me, and I look forward to working with you.
You as well. The Who the Folk podcast is a product of Jewfolk, Inc. If you haven't yet, please subscribe, rate, and review the show. If you have a suggestion of someone who should be on the show, please email me at editor@tcjewfolk.com. Also, go to tcjewfolk.com/podcast to listen to our new shows, We Won, Let's Eat, the Jewish Food Podcast, and The Jews Are Tired, a weekly recap of Jewish news through an analytical lens. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.